Welcome. This is episode 30 of Two Cents Tuesday. The last few days have been punctuated by heavy rainfall and thunderstorms as a number of weather systems have passed through our region. We are in the hurricane season, and this type of weather is expected for this time of year. We know that. We've known this for generations and generations. Fortunately, none of these weather systems has yet developed into a hurricane that has threatened one of our CARICOM islands. Although, unfortunately, Guadeloupe, Puerto Rico, Cayman Islands, and Bermuda have all been victims of the recent spate of bad weather. In 2018, I lived and worked in Dominica for several months after the passage of Hurricane Maria. That was a very sobering experience. Dominica is one of the Caribbean islands that I know very well, as a result of several trips to the Nature Isle, even before I had taken up my assignment. I was shocked when I first landed to start this assignment with the United Nations Development Program, or UNDP as it is known, and the government of Dominica, to find that the lush green landscapes for which the country was famous had been obliterated by Hurricane Maria. Coconut trees that once stood tall within that landscape had been stripped bare of their foliage and stood like unsteady poles trying to figure out their new purpose. Hurricane Maria, a monster Category 5 hurricane, had cut a swathe across the island and caused losses and damage equivalent to 226% of the country's gross domestic product, or GDP. This was on top of the severe damage that had been caused 2 years earlier by Tropical Storm Erika, which at the time had caused devastation equivalent to over 90% of the country's GDP. Those two experiences, within such a short space of time, had caused the Prime Minister of Dominica, Roosevelt Skerrit, to declare to the international community that his government intended to make Dominica the first climate-resilient country in the world. That pledge, as impossible as it was to achieve, served to highlight the desperate position in which extreme weather events had placed the island and its people. And it also helped to galvanize support to reduce the vulnerability of the people of Dominica to extreme weather events. In doing my work in Dominica, I got to speak with many people in government, the private sector, and civil society about what they had experienced during the passage of Hurricane Maria and how they felt the government should respond to ensure that when another storm or hurricane hit the island, not if, but when, the systems, infrastructure, and people would be better prepared. What struck me during these interviews and meetings was the frightening terror that had been visited on the island citizens that night when Hurricane Maria struck, and the fact that this could just as easily have been my own country, St. Lucia. I am sure many of us remember the enormity of the regional response to help the citizens of Dominica after the passage of Hurricane Maria. There was the irony that one of the most requested commodities from Dominica was something that the country normally had in abundance, and that is water, drinking water. Boats left St. Lucia laden with supplies, medical supplies, food items, clothing, and pallets of bottled water to help relieve the plight and suffering of our brothers and sisters of the Caribbean island that is perhaps most like ours. It's mountainous. It has similar place names like Marigot and Roseau and Massac, which is the equivalent of our Masque, and a shared French Creole culture. Dominica gave me practical examples of what I'd been saying and reading in documents and reports, and that is climate change is a clear and present danger to the citizens of small island developing states, an existential threat. And it impacts every sector, every segment of our population, some more so than others. The other thing that jolted me during my time living and working in Dominica is how little the islands of our region have learned from the experiences of others. In the months following the passage of Hurricane Maria, Dominica provided a test case for every island, from Trinidad to Belize, on the level of preparedness that is needed to deal with what is now becoming our new norm. Monster hurricanes packing very strong winds and massive amounts of rainfall, which were now intensifying within an alarmingly short period, and also was cycling from Category 1 to Category 5 within a few hours. What you thought would hit you as a Category 1 hurricane could very easily escalate within hours to a Category 5 hurricane. Make no mistake, a hurricane, any hurricane, is a deadly and destructive force of nature. NASA has estimated that during its life cycle, the average hurricane, not even a Cat 5 monster like Maria or Irma, can release as much energy as 10,000 nuclear bombs. 10,000 nuclear bombs, yes. Again, for context, the average hurricane produces 200 times the electrical generating energy of our entire planet. That is the ferocity and the fury that hits our islands every time a hurricane strikes. And this is what we have been told will become even stronger and more intense with climate change, because our oceans are getting warmer and providing more energy for the hurricanes to feed off. So the question I keep asking myself is, why is it year after year we do not plan and prepare for the hurricane season with the seriousness and diligence that this deadly period requires? Why have we not learned from the recent painful, deadly lessons of our sister islands of Dominica and the British Virgin Islands? I'm not even going back to the lessons of Ivan in Grenada or Gilbert in Jamaica, because these are probably too far back for many people to remember. But both Irma and Maria were just 5 years ago. How prepared is our health sector, for example, to deal with the passage of a hurricane? Will the roof at the George Odlum Stadium, which currently houses our national hospital in the south and which has housed that hospital for over 10 years now, will that roof be able to withstand the impacts of a Category 1 or higher hurricane? Do we have enough water storage capacity at each of our 3 major hospitals to ensure that the patients and healthcare workers at OKEU, the Respiratory Hospital, and the National Stadium, St. Jude's Hospital, will have clean water for at least 3 to 5 days while water supplies are being restored in the event of catastrophic damage to our water supply and distribution system? Do the electricity generators at these facilities work? And is there a system to get the fuel that will be required to keep these generators going in the event Lucelec is not able to restore power within 24 to 48 hours? Have we made provision for accommodation for the doctors, nurses, nursing assistants, orderlies, and technicians who may need to do extended shifts at the hospitals because the roads are impassable or unsafe, and the people who should be relieving them cannot make their way to the hospital? Do our community response teams know where the chronically ill or disabled patients are located so that they can be assisted first in the aftermath of a hurricane? For example, if a diabetic patient has no electricity at their home and therefore no way to keep their insulin supply refrigerated, that insulin, which is a peptide hormone, can spoil and be rendered useless in controlling the blood sugar of the patient. The result can be deadly. Similarly, if a patient who requires dialysis is unable to get to the hospital for his dialysis treatments, however often, 2, 3 times a week that they need to be dialyzed because they have end-stage renal disease, they can't get to the hospital because the roads to their home, from their home to the hospital, are impassable, the chances of that patient dying are increased significantly. Do our community emergency organizations know who these people are and where they live so that they can prioritize them in the emergency response? How about the command and control system of the government? Has that been tested? Do the new ministers know what is expected of them? Did the old ministers know what was expected of them? Have they been familiarized with the response systems for their ministry, their respective ministry, and for the sectors over which they have responsibility? What sort of business continuity systems are in place to ensure the functioning of the critical government agencies? The same holds for private sector agencies. Do they have business continuity plans? Many of our schools serve as emergency shelters. Have we checked all of them, all of these shelters, to ensure that they can be used within a very short period in the event that they need to be used if we have, heaven forbid, a natural disaster? Do we have systems in place to segregate women and children in these facilities to keep them safe from abuse? It is foolhardy to assume that antisocial behavior will cease because there is a national crisis. In fact, the chaos that accompanies a national crisis often provides a perfect cover for antisocial behavior and predatory actions. Have we spoken to our 2 telecom service providers to put in place a system that will allow users whose network may be down to seamlessly switch without cost to the other service provider that is still functional so that they can make local calls? After all, we live in a country that is located within the Atlantic hurricane belt. So we know that every year, between the months of June and November, we will experience storms, hurricanes, and other forms of bad weather. We also know that climate change is increasing the intensity and severity of these weather events and making it more likely that infrastructure will be damaged, livelihoods destroyed, and unfortunately, lives lost. Are we doing anything other than the customary clearing of drains and desilting of rivers, which, by the way, some of the contractors are doing very poorly, and in the process, increasing the vulnerability of the slopes with the indiscriminate way in which they scrape away all the vegetation on the riverbank? And I would really recommend that the Ministry of Infrastructure liaises with the Forestry Department to ensure that river desilting is done in a much more sustainable and safe manner. We may not be able to make St. Lucia a climate resilient country, but we can do much more to reduce our vulnerability and increase our levels of preparedness. It is not enough to advocate and agitate in the international community for strong action and finance to fight climate change. We must play our part in better preparing ourselves to deal with this menace and its impacts. We can start by talking to our sister islands who recently had to pick up the pieces, bury their loved ones, repair their country, and undertake massive recovery programs after the passage of major hurricanes. Find out what lessons they learned. Avoid repeating their mistakes and adopt the things that worked out to be best practices for them. There really is no need for us to reinvent the wheel or for us to mobilize large sums of money from the Caribbean Development Bank or the World Bank or pay some high-priced international consultant to write a report telling us what we should do. We can do it ourselves. But please, let's do it before, heaven forbid, we find ourselves staring a monster hurricane in the eye. You know what they say about Bab Kamawado? Ebe, magwe di fe japui a Bab Kamawad no, plusieurs fois, nous we fize ouze sa no. We need to take action, take proactive action, take preemptive action. Thank you for viewing another 2 Cents Tuesday. Have a good week, a productive week, and please stay safe. Goodbye.